Okay. Hello, English Lit students. The bin men have just arrived. Excellent. So you hear a nice rolling noise out there. That's what that is. Right, so what I'm going to do today is show you the documents that I spectacularly failed to show you yesterday when I was attempting to share the screen. When I record it, I actually see what you're seeing, so it's much clearer. So hopefully this time this will all work. Great. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to show you is just Moodle and what you've got on Christina Rossetti on Moodle. Okay, so the actual poems are there, and then I've put all the context together, and I've given it all the first word context. Yesterday, some people said they'd like to revise context. If that is what you'd like to do, there is a lot on context there, so I don't really want to add to it. So instead, if you want to revise context, what I would suggest is you find the that says connex, excellent, the context documents that also have a task. So there's one that their religion article with tasks. I did set that really early in the first year, so you may remember having done that, so you don't necessarily have to do that one, but have a look. Or there's this one, gender, and that is nice because that's a video. So it's a academic from the British Library. She's videoed talking about gender in Victorian times, and I've added some tasks. So if you want to revise that today, it might be quite nice to watch something on video rather than just read a text. Okay. And then these are the documents I was trying to show you yesterday. We did look at the PowerPoints, that did work, but this one, revise using critical responses, didn't. So I am now going to show you that and explain what I think you should do with it. Okay, so I need to do that, and yay, share this with you. Okay, so what this is an article about how people have responded, critics have responded to Rossetti's poetry over time, and it's quite good to have an overview. So what this gives you is an overview of all Rossetti's poems and what people see as her sort of signature styles, what's specific about her. The other reason I've given you this is it is written quite formally, it is written quite in advanced style, and it's something that a lot of you could still improve and work on, writing in a more formal register. Now, sometimes, you may think, and I may think, you've just got to avoid slang, but I don't necessarily think that's the case. I think you need to have a wider range of expressions to use. It's possibly that you're using slang expressions because you can't think of a more formal way of putting what you want to say. And I really don't want to prevent you talking about how you feel about the poems and responding to them naturally. But by the time we get to the second year in the exam, it really will stand you in good stead to have more formal and a wider range of vocabulary and expressions at your disposal. So reading texts, reading critical writing that is written in this way will give you a model for doing that. So I have put in bold some of the key ways that Rossetti's poems and poetry is being described. And I do like this expression, artless art. It's a paradox, and it's her brother used this term to describe her poetry. And I think it's good because people do talk about her poems being simple. And some people, some critics do slightly feel she's not that deep, or she's not that intellectual. But what he's saying in this phrase, artless art, is in fact, it's very artful, it's very skillful. It gives the impression of not being worked at hard, which is what art includes working really hard on stuff. That's what artful means being very clever. Okay. So one of the things that Rossetti is acknowledged as being very good at is lyric poetry. And writing lyrics, right? Not lyrics for poems, but not lyrics for songs, but poems that are called lyric. And this is one of the forms we talked about yesterday as well. So it would be really good if you could spot and discuss if a poem is a lyric poem. Key things about lyric poem are first person, but not a created dramatic character. That sense that the first person is the poet, the voice of the poet speaking. And lyric poems are about emotion and feeling and really expressing in detail how you're feeling. And they tend to be just one situation. Okay, so the task is to find examples to suggest that Rossetti has this very good command of diction, tone, and form. Okay, so I think this is a good revision of AO2 task. Go back to the poems, choose one, choose two that have a similar theme, and then look at diction. And this will hopefully prevent you just mentioning one word. Okay, one word is never going to be able to tell a great deal about how a poem works. If you find 3 or 4 words that all share, they come from the same field, or they have a similar connotation, or they create the same mood, that's what you're looking at for diction. Okay, or is it all really simple, plain language? Or is she using religious diction? That's what you're looking for under diction. It very much adds to tone, but tone includes tone of voice. So when you're looking at tone, it could be a character she's got speaking, or it could be the voice of the poet, as it were, the speaker of the poem. So have a look at how she creates a sort of tone. When you want to talk about tone, you want to think about tone of voice. You're looking for adjectives to describe, and the richer the better. Use a thesaurus, it's absolutely fine. And then the perfection of form. How does the form match the content in her poems? How does the form follow the structure? That's what you want to look at when you're talking about form. Okay, so her work has been described, or you can talk about the complexity and the variety of her work. So complexity, some of the poems are extremely complex. One of the things I'm going to put up for you today is a PowerPoint, and I'm going to talk you through the poem Memory, which I think is one we didn't do in class. I can't remember for certain, but it's a very complex poem. And so if you want to think about how you demonstrate complexity in Rossetti, that would be a good one. And variety, yeah, different forms, different moods, different tones. Yeah, just think about the variety of her work. And then what arguments could you make that Rossetti actually does display intellectual depth? And that means thinking about ideas. That's what intellectual means. So if there's intellectual depth, she's really thinking about questions, thinking about things from more than one angle. And aesthetic complexity, aesthetics is more to do with form and appearance. So how her poems complex in their form. And then have a go at writing a paragraph. All of those examples you've just thought through could help you write a paragraph about how much art there is that goes into making a poems appear simple. Okay, so that's quite a challenging task, but I think, you know, I would like to push you a little bit. I'm not putting a assessment box up onto Moodle, but I am suggesting this is a task you do to revise Rossetti today. If you would rather do the context task, you know, I'm kind of giving you some responsibility / freedom to decide yourself what it is you need and want to revise. Okay, but you know, do one of these revision tasks today. Okay, and then the last document that oh, sorry, I'll take you back to the Moodle page. So that was there, revise using critical forms. Okay, so that's one of the things you could do today, or gender ideology, video and tasks. And then this last thing I want to show you is not a revision task. There aren't any activities for you to do, but I would like to look at it. And the reason I want you to look at this is it's at the very bottom, it says exemplar 27, question 17 on stories. That is the question that I set you to do those tasks on over Easter. Okay, and this is what it looks like. Oh, look at me clicking through now. Examiner's report with exemplar. So this is the question you had to go out the Goblin Market. Okay, and this is the examiner's report, so it's really clear what they're looking for. And some of the things they want, I might even do this. Is this going to work? Let's see. So these are the things they want. They want to see answers which engage with the poems in detail. Okay, and in the work that I marked for you, quite a lot of your answers, it's basically the proportion of what you're writing about needs to shift. It needs to be less, sounds really mean, less of you talking about the poem, what it means, and what it's all about, less context, and more quoting and analysing. That's what engaging with poems in detail means. So look at your paragraphs, and in some of your answers there were 3 or 4 sentences before I got to a quote, and then there was sometimes just a quote, no analysis of the quote, and only 1 quote in the paragraph. You need a bit more. When you look at the exemplar below, you'll see that. Only rarely did candidates consider any variation or ambiguity in the poet's ideals and beliefs. Okay, now that is hard, I know, but when you're reading the poem and you think it says one thing and then it appears to say another thing, don't let that scare you. It's quite possible that Rossetti is being ambiguous, that she is balancing 2 different ways of looking at stuff. And also because in some poems she's really, really religious, doesn't mean in others she's not full of religious doubt. Okay. So, analysis of form and structure. That is, one of the ways to really make sure you're engaging with AO2. And I would really encourage you to try and be able to identify the form and structure of the poem you're writing about. Possibly that should be the first thing you do. In most of the PowerPoints, I talk about form and structure first. Not always, but most of them I do. Okay, not all the poems have a named form. Yeah, they're not all sonnets, lyric poems, ballads, dramatic monologue. I'm going to add that to the PowerPoint on form because we have talked about dramatic monologue, but I noticed yesterday it wasn't on there. So that's another form. And even if you can't name a form, you can always talk about structure. What's in each stanza? How does the rhyme scheme add to meaning? How do the sentences work with the rhyme scheme? It's maybe not easy to talk about that, but it will get you a lot of reward. And be willing to engage in alternative readings of the poem. This is the thing about ambiguity. Be willing to say, it could be this, it could be that. And I guess the poem we did that the most with was Goblin Market. Yeah, that Goblin Market can be read, there's a very strong feminist reading of Goblin Market where it's about sisterhood and women standing up and supporting one another. It's clearly a religious allegory that can be read. It can be read as being about rape, sexual assault, So there are different ways of reading that poem, and Rossetti herself is quite clever about never saying what it was actually about. She obviously clearly wanted it to remain ambiguous. Okay, this is what they don't want, so I'm not going to highlight it. Paraphrase and narrative elements. Okay, and some of your answers did, slightly veer into this, telling me what happens in the poem and what it means. And unfortunately, at A level, there are not many marks available for just understanding the text, which I know sounds a bit mean because they're not easy texts. But the examiners do expect you to understand the texts. You don't really get much credit for that. What the text means is put across is what you're looking for. Okay. So, this idea about moral messages, that's fine. Linked to social context. More could have been made on the ways in which stories are told rather than their message. Okay, so once again, this is the AO2 focus. How Christina Rossetti does what she does. This would have allowed deeper engagement at AO2. So if you're asked about stories, you see here are some of the things you can talk about. We haven't necessarily mentioned those things, but we have talked about characterization, use of settings, use of plot and time, flashbacks, things like that. Those are all storytelling features. Okay, do not retell the story, analyze it. So I've turned that into some do's and don'ts for you there. And then this is the extract that the examiner's report had, and it's a level 5 response. That's the top level in the mark scheme. Okay, and what they're looking at and what's good about it is close attention to the poet's craft. Talks about religious context, the ways Rossetti has written in detail. Okay, So here's the here's the student's work. Starts with a linking word, very nice, to the last paragraph. Furthermore, in Goblin Market, look, this is why it's a level 5 response. She put the title of the poem in inverted commas. Please do that. And if you don't do that in your first year exam, I'm going to get a nasty sticker, stick it on it. Put the title of the poem in inverted commas. Okay. Now, I just want you to notice, hey, there we go, how often this student starts or somewhere in their answer puts Rossetti presents. We have talked about this as a way to make sure you're sticking to analysing. Okay, and it's interesting because it doesn't stand out as you're reading the answer. You don't think, oh, she keeps saying that. So it works really effectively to make sure you're doing the AO2. Rossetti presents the story of the temptation. Rossetti presents the goblin men, and then here, when you look, this is the quote. Okay, this is its technique, repetitive speech, and this is its effect. It's like a charm. Here's the next quote. Whoa, not that. Figs to fill your mouth, citrons from the south. Here's its analysis. Iambic, structure, and rhyming couplets. And you might say, oh, and we all did yesterday, meter, it's so hard, don't talk about meter. Okay, one, I will put something up about meter to remind you of it. But you don't have to mention meter. Rhyming couplets is fine, and you can all identify and discuss a rhyming couplet. Yeah. But that's talking about technique and structure. A bit of context there about the Garden of Eden, the temptation of Eve, but that's it. Yeah, it's not. She doesn't go into that in massive detail. We've had a lot of analysis. We've had 2 quotes already, and we get excessive listing of fruits. Okay, and so there are 4 quotes in that one paragraph, all making the same point. Excuse me. So I hope that shows you the level of quotation analysis we need. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing that. Take us back to Moodle. Okay, so there is Moodle, and just to remind you where everything is, I'd like you to read that, not now, but if you're thinking, oh, I don't know how to write a good paragraph, that's an example. Not that you don't, many of you write very good paragraphs. And either this task today or one of the contexts with tasks. But I'm not putting up assignment box, it's revision work. I'm going to trust you, 1, to do it, 2, to choose the right one to do for you. If you do want to write them a paragraph or some points up and just make sure you're on the right lines, you can email that to me and I will look at it. Okay, and as usual, any questions, send me an email. Okay, thank you guys. Bye. Oh, I'm just going to stop sharing and I'm going to end. Bye.